Something came in the mail today. Sonic Underground is a Sonic the Hedgehog TV show released in January 1999, and out of all of the Sonic shows, it seems to be the most obscure. I personally loved this show when I was just a small, tiny, minuscule little baby, but it seems like most people don't share the same feelings, if they've even heard of it at all. It's easy to understand why most people wouldn't like this show because, well, it's just not very good. But despite the voice acting, animation, and some of the characters, I think the show actually had a lot of potential and good aspects that make it so fun to watch if you have a lot of nostalgia for it like I do. And since every other YouTube video I've made was either making up blatantly untrue garbage and claiming it's satire, making fun of something, or doing both of those things at once, I thought it would be kind of cool if I talked about something I didn't hate for once and gave my perspective about that. The first thing I noticed when I remembered the show existed and started watching it again, and probably the show's best aspect overall, was that Sonic Underground has really interesting world building. Normally in a Sonic show, there's Sonic and his pal Tails who are trying to prevent Robotnik from taking over the world and turning all the animals into robots. But Sonic Underground is set in a much more bleak world where Robotnik has already mostly succeeded and turned almost everyone into subservient robots. And instead of Sonic and Tails fighting against him to save the world, Sonic and his siblings, who are unique to the show, are descendants of the rightful ruler of the world, Queen Alina, who was forced to abandon them when they were born as Robotnik was rising to power. Because of this, their main goal throughout the show is actually just to find their mother. They still try to stop Robotnik because, well, it's a Sonic show. It's kind of what he's known for. But most of what they do in the show is motivated by their goal to find their mother, and stopping Robotnik is lower priority for them, and they mostly end up doing it incidentally when they run into Robotnik and his underlings in their search for their mother. Fights with Robotnik aren't less common in the show. It still happens every episode, since Robotnik is also looking for their mother, but it's a much more interesting way to get them to fight each other compared to the generic Robotnik is doing a bad thing and Sonic is a cool hero narrative that the games, and by extension the two Sonic shows before this, followed. I think that's a pretty cool premise, especially for a show based on a 2D platformer from the 90s with barely any story to it. But aside from the premise being cool, most episodes revolve around their own cool and unique aspect of their world as well. Like how in episode 3 Sonic and his siblings are searching for a utopian city that exists in their world's folklore, which can only be accessed by a portal that appears once every year. And when they miraculously find it, they find out that the supposedly not real city is actually the socialist utopia where they were born. Knowing this was aimed at children, they could have put a lot less effort into adding cool details like these and still gotten the same amount of attention that they did, but they added them anyway, and it definitely worked out well in the end. The character writing is a bit inconsistent, but the character design is pretty consistently good. The Sonic siblings themselves are pretty average cartoon characters. They're just recolors of Sonic with some small changes, but the more unique supporting characters and Robotnik's underlings, who aren't based around other Sonic media, are mostly really interesting and well designed. Just like what the show does with the world building, it introduces new cool characters almost every episode. My favorite example of this is the captain of the ship in episode 6. Where most shows would have just used an anthropomorphic sea creature, the people working on Sonic Underground decided to design a really cool coral man who's constantly soaked in water, and has a Moby Dick-esque obsession with catching and killing the sea monster that lives in the sea near him. Even the background characters with no lines and who are sometimes even almost unnoticeable all have unique character designs and outfits. They're obviously not quite as interesting as the main supporting characters in each episode, but given how little the show seems to care about certain more important details like the plot or the voice acting, it's still cool to me that they put this much effort into making cool and unique background characters, instead of just recoloring the same template like most shows would. One particularly cool background character I noticed was in the first scene of episode 5. There's a man walking a really interesting mutated slug dog thing who passes by the camera and ends up getting pickpocketed by that episode's main supporting character. The man himself is fairly standard for Sonic Underground, although that's still fairly interesting, but the slug dog is particularly cool to me. Here are some other cool characters that I don't have much to say about, but that reinforce my arguments about the character design. One of the most obvious changes between this and the other Sonic shows, other than the cast and world, is that Sonic and his siblings are like, in a band. This is a weird idea, and I have no idea who thought of it or why it got approved, but surprisingly enough, it kinda works. When you think about Sonic and his siblings fighting things, there's a bit of a problem. How do his siblings fight? You could make them all fast like Sonic, but if there are other characters as fast as Sonic, then he would lose the biggest thing he's known for. You could also give them their own unique abilities, which would have worked fine, but I think the approach of giving them instruments that they can fight with works just as well as a method of fighting, but with the added bonus of setting the show apart from other cartoons airing around it. It also gives the people writing the music for the show an excuse to write and animate Sonic and his siblings' music, which is a big upside to me personally as somebody who really likes music. Speaking of the music, it's definitely interesting. There are some songs that are surprisingly good, and of course some that are shockingly bad, but they balance out to make the Underground, Sonic's band, into a pretty acceptable sounding rock band overall. It obviously wouldn't get very popular if it wasn't affiliated with Sonic, but similar to what I said in the section on world building, it's incredibly impressive that they managed to make the music sound acceptable at all despite the low budget. But not only does it manage to be listenable, it's actually fairly unique. It's weird to put the Hedgehog siblings in a band, but if it were somehow a logical decision to do so, I think the melancholic but empowering genre of rock is exactly the kind of music they would play. Here are some examples so you understand what I mean better.
When tomorrow comes, we'll be walking in the sun. Na, 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 na. Oh, when tomorrow comes, we got nothing but fun. Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. I'm looking for someone. Have you got 411? I'm searching everywhere for this special lady. Money can't buy the things we really need, like the sun or the rain or the air we breathe. Can't buy a love.
Unlike the other things I've talked about, the plot is more of a mixed bag. There's some genuinely really interesting storylines like the one I talked about earlier in episode 3 where they find the utopian city they were born in, and Manic finally finds a place where he feels at home for the first time, and then later that episode has to cope with it being destroyed by Robotnik. And then there's the one where Sonia's friend learns that not getting a manicure every day is a livable condition. Like I said, it's a mixed bag. I think overall the plot is one of the weakest points of the show, honestly. A lot of episodes have good ideas, but the execution is always lacking. Even the example I first thought of as a compelling episode wasn't executed very well. You would expect Manic coping with the loss of the first place he ever felt at home to be an emotional moment, and a good moment to develop his character or something. But instead they just rush a quick resolution where he ends up feeling fine a few minutes after it's destroyed, instead of allowing this to give him any form of character depth. The main reason I like this episode is because of how tightly the plot is intertwined with the show's world building. The subpar plot is pretty much carried by the show's strongest aspect. And that's the biggest reason why I don't recommend Sonic Underground overall. I do love this show more than almost any other I've seen because of its great world building, interesting risk-taking, literally insane premise, and so bad it's good voice acting. But the only reason I can really appreciate those things is because of the absolutely blinding nostalgia I have for it. This show is really bad unless you have that kind of nostalgia to overlook the subpar plot and inconsistent character writing. Unless you're into watching shows ironically, that is, then it's one of the best things you'll ever experience.